gems over here, and I gave myself plenty of time to get here. I had 30 seconds left, so I kind of.
Now you have 45 minutes.
What's that?
Now you have 45 minutes.
Oh. I thought it was 46. We're here on hallowed ground, here in Santa Fe. One of my ancestors, Don Pedro Durán y Chávez, was a founder of la Vía Real de la Santa Fe de San Francisco de Asís, the little city. Two of my ancestors were governors over here at the House of the Governors. As I reflect on this history, there are many things that come to my mind. Billy the Kid and other New Mexico legends. Padre Martinez, New Mexico's folk hero priest. Not enough can be said about it. Bishop Laney, made famous in Willa Cather's book, Death Comes for the Archbishop, as the protagonist, and Father Martinez as the antagonist. I wrote a book about it. The legend of La Llorona, a legend that I grew up with, that was part of who I am, part of my history, and part of my culture. And Fego Baca, do you know about him? The famous sheriff, right? He survived 4,000 bullets while he was in his little adobe hut. 4,000 bullets were shot at him, and he survived that. So he became a New Mexico legend. And Walt Disney produced a little mini-series about him. And two of my very popular books, I don't know why these books are so popular. Enchanted Legends and Lore of New Mexico. Witches, Ghosts, and Spirits. These are legends that I grew up with as a young boy growing up in Las Vegas, New Mexico.
Where?
Las Vegas, New Mexico. And this one, I'm listed on, would people believe I'm listed on 2 vampire websites? I don't know if that's a plus or a minus. It's New Mexico Book of the Undead, Goblin and Ghoul Folklore. It's because my mom used to tell me these stories. And she used to tell me I had to be careful at night. You can understand I had trouble sleeping at night, right? And the latest, Billy the Kid meets his ghost. I was stunned because Amazon took out advertising on Fox News Network for this book, and it's already been like 5 times that they've done it. So apparently it's selling nationally. Well, as a writer, you don't see very much money. So you don't go into it for the money. But you go into it for the enjoyment and the idea that you're producing something that may be worthwhile. One of the things that amazes me, and that I've always questioned in my own mind, is here we had Governor Lew Wallace, one of the most famous governors in the history of New Mexico. Where is his monument? Where is a room at the museum dedicated to his honor, right? Charlton Heston, one of the most popular actors, played the lead role. You can't beat that. I have no idea he produced as many books as he did. I think Charlton Heston was trying to get in touch with you. From beyond.
What was the film?
Pardon?
What was the film?
Ben-Hur. The book he started over here at the House of the Governors. Governor Luong's. He wrote the book Ben-Hur, and they believe that many of the ideas that he got for his book, he developed here. And he ingrained them into that novel. So as he was the governor of the territory, he was gathering these thoughts and seeing and experiencing and then pulling those ideas into his book. Can you imagine that? But we don't recognize that. When I was a young boy growing up in Albuquerque, I attended Luong's elementary school. So as a little boy, I already knew about Luong's. I already knew something about him, and I was attracted to him, and I was drawn to him because I wanted to know more. I had no idea he was a well-known Civil War general during the Civil War. And so he already had that recognition before he was appointed governor of the territory of New Mexico. But then, even after he left New Mexico, his career blossomed and bloomed, especially with Ben-Hur, a national bestseller that continues to be an extremely popular book and sells widely. There was a documentary film that I saw a few months ago, and it was called The American Experience. And it was researching the connections of the Hispanics with Billy the Kid, or the Billy the Kid Hispanic connection, that's what it was called. And it was widely publicized. It was well hyped. I kept seeing the hype on that documentary film. And then I thought to myself, my gosh, I had my calendar there, and I was marking off the days waiting to watch that documentary film, because I wanted to see what the Hispanic connection was. And when I saw the film, I was totally disappointed. Where was the Hispanic connection? Same thing we've heard before, right? He knew how to speak Spanish well. He had Hispanic girlfriends. What was the other thing? Oh, he grew up in Silver City, which had a large Hispanic population. In fact, at the time that Billy the Kid was there, it was called San Vicente. And then they changed the name to Silver City. That's one of the things that I found. But they wound up introducing or pulling in photographs that were taken in Mexico villages and towns, and using those to illustrate the Hispanic connection of Billy the Kid. Well, didn't they even know? Don't they even know what the Hispanic connection of Billy the Kid is? My father was born in 1903 in Old Albuquerque. And his family moved to Las Vegas, New Mexico, when he was a little boy. He became a newspaper boy. So he was always selling newspapers up and down Bridge Street in Old Town Las Vegas. And he was very much interested in the history, because if you really think, I never even thought about it that way, but if you really think, yes, that was a territorial period in New Mexico, but in 1903, this was still like 1880, right? Nothing had changed. They were still riding horses. They were still in wagons. In 1912, when he was a newspaper boy, they were still riding horses, still riding wagons. And so he knew all about that culture, and he experienced it all. He was all excited telling me as a little boy that he had known Jose Chávez y Chávez. And he told me that he used to wait for him over there at the park bench for him to deliver his newspaper every day. And then he would tell him stories about the way the kitchen. That was one thing I heard. The other thing was that my great-grandmother, Doña Caterina Mondragon de Valdez, was a curandera, well known in northern New Mexico, had treated Billy the Kid at one time, and that she was present. My mother was very proud of telling me this. That she was present at the Old Town Plaza, actually up before the told me exactly where he was at, near Highlands University. She was standing there with the rest of the group of people waiting for the wagon to bring Billy the Kid into town. And then while he was over there at the jail, since she only lived 2 blocks up the street, she took him things to eat over at the jail while he was there. So those were memories that always stuck with me. And he was extremely proud of the fact that when he wound up moving, when he was still in Las Vegas, he and his older brother hiked the train, because they always hiked the train. And he would explain that they would run alongside the train, and then when they'd see an open boxcar, they'd jump in. And then when they get to the town they were going to, they'd jump off. So I wonder they survived, right? But he wanted to see Buffalo Bill, Cody, and he was going to be in Albuquerque. He knew about it because he was reading the newspaper. And so he wanted to go meet him. So he told me a story about that I actually saw this on a film. It was actually my dad. I didn't even realize that. He went searching for Buffalo Bill Cody, and he asked where he was at, and they told him which tent he was at. So he peeked underneath the tent to get a look at it. And he said, my dad said Buffalo Bill Cody was over there at the mirror getting ready for his show, and he happened to spot him, and he asked him to come in. And then he talked to him too. So these were memories that I was experiencing and living with, and they were shaping my life and career as a writer. And of course, my mother's side, she came from a little village. She had 6 brothers and 6 sisters. They came from Peñasco Blanco, New Mexico, near Mora, in the northern part of the state. And my mother would tell me that she and her other sisters would help to churn the butter, and that they would go up to the hills and look for the broom plant to make their own brooms. They would, they made their own dolls out of corn husk. Corn husk dolls, she called them. And they lived in a little mud hut that had dirt floors. They had no bills, she said. She was born in 1915, by the way. They had no bills. They didn't have to worry about anything because they used to go to a monthly market where all the ranchers and farmers would gather and they would all trade. She thought it was beautiful. And then the other thing she told me is the best times of my life were during the Depression. We didn't have any money, she said, but we appreciated everything that we had, and we all helped each other. We all shared with one another, and everybody was one family. My dad became a traveling salesman, traveling throughout New Mexico. And that was during World War II. And as he traveled, he met a lot of people. And he was always proud of having known governors, district attorneys, judges. And they're always also proud of the fact that my great-grandmother had a collection of photographs of people that she had treated that had been given, pictures that had been given to her as gifts for her to remember them by. And that's how it was in every family, actually. When I married my wife, and I met her grandmother, her grandmother died at 98. The first thing her grandmother did, and I think she was about 96 at the time, is she called me in, come over here, I want to show you something. She took me to a little room where she had all these pictures on the walls, from the bottom of the floor all the way to the top. And then she pointed to each one. This is so-and-so. This is what's so-and-so. This is, and she was telling me the story of each one. I thought that was a beautiful experience. My dad, like I said, was born in 1903. My wife's father, would you believe this? He died at 102, and he was born a year before Billy the Kid. And the folklore in her family was that he had known Billy the Kid during his life, and he had ridden with him. And he was proud of it. In fact, they wrote it in his obituary. I have a copy of the obituary. It's written in there. Rode with Billy the Kid and knew Pat Garrett. And so here he was, 102, and he talked about when he lived in Tularosa. And that he was a rancher. And in Las Vegas, where I'm from, the Jose Chávez family still lives there. The descendants. My dad would tell me, Jose Chávez lived right up the street, and he used to walk right over here in front of our house, and he'd go walking to the park. He told me I was a little boy when we were driving out the driveway. He was proud of the fact that he knew him. And it was way before Young Guns, the movie. It was just a thought and the idea. So, where is the Hispanic connection to Billy the Kid? So it's all over. He was in Tularosa. He was in Albuquerque. Nothing has been written about that. Somebody told me years ago, because I'm also an artist, and this gentleman that I was talking to that was also an artist said, everything that could be painted has already been painted. What do you mean by that? Is that true? Everything has been photographed, has already been photographed, right? You could stretch it. Everything, somebody told me everything that's been written about Billy the Kid has already been written. You can't write anymore. So, really? It depends on the slant and the perspective of the writer, right? So, unfortunately, what I've seen is that as you're digging in and you're researching, and Howard Bryan was a very close friend of mine. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember his name or you know who he was? He was a tremendous person. He had a column that was called Off the Beaten Path at the Albuquerque Tribune in Albuquerque. And my dad used to collect every single one. My dad was an avid reader. He was always reading. So he used to get the newspaper every single morning. And then he would cut out the Off the Beaten Path column or hand me that part of the newspaper and tell me cut that out and save it. Study that. And don't forget that. So as a young boy, we didn't have any TV. We didn't have any radio or record player. So history was an important thing for me in the family. I wanted to know everything. My genealogy, my ancestry, and the history. And I wanted to ingrain this in myself and go from there. And it's a good thing that I did because, of course, it helped me with my university studies. It helped me to be a teacher at the university level and work with other students. And it developed and spurred my education, career as an educator. But here were these stories. And like I say, on the other side of the coin, my mother was into folklore. And she actually was very superstitious. That's one thing I can say about my mother. She was extremely superstitious. She believed in spirits, and that there are evil spirits that are around that we have to be careful with. And los duendes, have you heard that? The duendes. She would tell me, tienes que tener cuidado, hijo, entre la noche. You have to be careful at night. Porque si no, a duende could come out from hiding and get you. So be careful. And the other story was, and I've heard a lot of people that don't know about this, is that a spirit can come up late at night and pull you from the toes, right? Or pull your toes. So we would tie the sheet over our feet as tight as we could so that evil spirit wouldn't pull you on your toes late at night. And of course, La Llorona, the wailing spirit, is out there. And she's looking for anybody that isn't behaving well. It doesn't make any difference how old you are or how young. she can appear to you. They were telling this story about this man in Mora that was walking up, that would go to the bar every single night and drink until he would get drunk. And he was not taking care of his wife, he wasn't taking care of his family. And one night they said he was walking home and that this beautiful, beautiful girl appeared in front of him. And he was stunned when he saw her. He was stunned by her beauty. He was attracted to her immediately. And he was, he was so drawn to her that he wanted to meet her. And he wanted to know who she was, where she came from. But then suddenly she transformed and turned into this hideous old woman with long white hair and a real wrinkled face, long fingernails, and she reached out to get him, and he took her running, they said. And he ran as fast as he could, and he could hear her cry right behind him. They said that after that night he was totally transformed, never touched a drink again for the rest of his life, and took care of his wife and kids. So here we have Billy the Kid. You know that there's a lot of murder, mystery, and intrigue in the history of New Mexico? Can you imagine that? And there's many writers that have used that title. Murder, mystery, and intrigue in New Mexico. One of my best friends, Mark Simmons, that I've known for many years. Now I think I'm for at least 35 years or more. He has always been a great supporter and a great helper. And we have always depended on him for a lot of things. And he's a tremendous writer. I really appreciate Mark Simmons. But he wrote a book that drew that title in. And of course he has a weekly column here in Santa Fe also. Murder, mystery, and intrigue. When you think about the life of Billy the Kid, that's all it is. Murder, mystery, and intrigue. Because they're still reflecting on his death in 1881. What happened exactly? Truist magazine keeps on coming on with numerous articles. Documentary films keep on appearing. And how did the killing of Billy the Kid actually take place? And what was behind it? So here we have the President of the United States that's involved in New Mexico territory. We have Governor Lew Wallace and previous governors that are involved in this intrigue. And it goes out like tentacles throughout the territory. Here we have judges, lawyers, lawmen, outlaws. And when I think about my dad, that he was born in 1903 and he lived during that transition period, that the territory of New Mexico, there weren't that many people here. You know, if you really think about it, what was the population of New Mexico in 1903 or 1912 or 1899? There weren't that many people here, so a lot of people knew each other. They actually knew each other. And when I talk about places that haven't even been covered in the life of Billy the Kid, Las Vegas, New Mexico, my hometown. The railroad arrived in Mexico in 1879. Give or take a few months. But it's a traditional date. And they say that Las Vegas was transformed from one day to the next. For example, East Las Vegas was created right next to the railroad depot. And they started putting up buildings, they started putting up saloons. It was booming. Would you believe that during the Civil War, when the Confederates took over Santa Fe under General Sibley, that the capital of New Mexico was moved to Las Vegas? The Capitol building is still there. It's part of the police department. And I talked to the Citizens Committee for Historic Preservation, constantly brought things up, and I think to myself, why don't they put a plaque there to commemorate that building? Why isn't they're too involved with the Victorian houses. But I'm interested in the history. The first Lieutenant Governor of New Mexico, when New Mexico became a state, was Ezequiel de Vaca from Las Vegas. His house is right up the street from where I still have my home. Governor Mills was from Las Vegas. There were many influential politicians, political leaders like Governor Octaviano Larrazolo, that was extremely popular and extremely famous. He became a congressman, I believe, or senator. And so a lot of these individuals attained high places in office in Washington, D.C. And here you have Las Vegas, New Mexico, where they came from. So Las Vegas, New Mexico was a booming town. It was a boom town. And they actually thought, would you believe this? They actually thought of moving the capital from Santa Fe at one period to Las Vegas. You wouldn't, if you were to go to Las Vegas today, you wouldn't even believe that. Of course, during my dad's day, you know, during the 1930s, 1940s, Las Vegas didn't look anything like what it does today. A lot of the historic buildings that were demolished. The jail that Billy the Kid was kept at was demolished. I got to see it as a little boy because I was interested in it. I didn't want to know exactly where it was at. So I went over there and I got to see the ruins just before they tore it down. So that's one aspect. Well, of course, Billy the Kid still lives, right? Elvis Presley still lives. Does Marilyn Monroe still live? Does it apply to women too? I loved Marilyn Monroe as a kid. Anyway, I dreamt about her. But here we have Billy the Kid. Still lived with Russia Bill Roberts, who came to Santa Fe and asked for a pardon. And they're still investigating that, still researching. That's still the subject of books. Another guy by the name of John Miller claimed that he was Billy the Kid. But you know, at that time, I guess there were a lot of Billy the Kids. But here we go back to 1879 when Las Vegas was a boom town and they were opening saloons. Guess who was the one that opened a saloon over there that became extremely famous in Western history? Who can tell? Wyatt Earp was there. No, he was just in passing. But his sidekick, Doc Holliday. And apparently Doc Holliday was in Las Vegas. And you know, when you're historians, there's always contradiction and there's always controversy. So one historian says he was only there for a very short time, but then you read that he was there for over a year. And that there is documentation that proves that. So we don't know exactly the length of time that he was there, but it was before he traveled into Texas and he went to Tombstone, Arizona, where he became famous at the gun battle at the OK Corral. But Billy the Kid was in Las Vegas. Doc Holliday was in Las Vegas. Jesse James was in Las Vegas. Over at the Adobe Hotel at the Montezuma Springs. All of them were there at the same time. And according to some folkloric history, Billy the Kid got to meet Jesse James. So here I came up with this book. And Billy the Kid meets his ghost. Cowboy star Roy Rogers, along with his horse Trigger, captivated audiences in his return of Billy the Kid movies in the 1930s. Did you know that? Roy Rogers, the king of the cowboys, played Billy the Kid. In 1949, DC's All-Star Comics pitted Billy the Kid against Justice Society of America heroes. Billy faced up to Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman, Atom, Black Canary, Dr. Midnight, and Wonder Woman. In 1966, Marvel Comics featured Billy the Kid in a showdown with the Two-Gun Kid. Billy the Kid has faced vigilantes and vampires. Did you ever see the Billy the Kid meets Dracula? Crooked judges and crooked lawmen on film, in books, and comic books. He has stood up to ghosts, evil men and mean spirits. Do you know that there's a new book, and I have to get a copy of it? It's called The Vampire Apocalypse, Billy the Kid and the Vampire Apocalypse of 1881. So he's fighting vampires now. In the history, myths, folklore, and legends of Western America, the kid is presented as both outlaw and lawman. In a contradiction, more often than not, Billy the Kid fights for justice in the American way. It's interesting that he's portrayed that way more often than not. And that's why if you ask about Western culture over there in Japan, what do you know about Western culture? We know about Billy the Kid. They honestly do. In Paris, France, they had a series of Billy the Kid comic books, and of course the films were translated into French. England has produced many books there for children on Billy the Kid. Canada has a comic book series that they put out. Billy the Kid is known all over the world. And that's why you know that that's what a drawing attraction to Lincoln, New Mexico, right? And any place else that was associated with it. Right over here, right across the street, there was a jail that no longer exists because they did the same thing like they did in Las Vegas. They tore the jail down. But there's a building there that's a site, and I think they have a plaque there, right? Yes. That mentions that Billy the Kid was once held at the jail there. But I want to see something on Lew Wallace, because here was Lew Wallace right up the street, and here was Billy the Kid at the jail cell writing letters and notes to Lew Wallace while he was over here as governor. Because he was promised amnesty and it was never delivered. But it was delivered to a lot of other outlaws that were involved with the Santa Fe Ring, the notorious Santa Fe Ring. And the Santa Fe Ring has always been the basis of motion pictures, Western motion pictures, and other films, you know, TV films or whatever, on Western America, where you've got this group of manipulators. They're manipulating everything. They have judges and lawyers and gunmen that fight for them. Would you believe that I never even knew this. When Governor Lew Wallace was here, and he was appointed as the territorial governor by the president, was it Rutherford B. Hayes? I think it was President Rutherford B. Hayes. Yeah, he was appointed by the president to restore law and order to New Mexico. So the first thing he did is he appointed, since he was a military man, he appointed a quasi-military group called the Lincoln County Rifles to restore law and order to Lincoln County and that area of New Mexico. Captain Bautista Pino from Lincoln was the commander. 95 to 96% of the riders that were well armed, that were meant to restore law and order to New Mexico, were Hispanic ranchmen. Can you imagine that? I didn't even know that. And Jose Chávez, that rode with Billy the Kid, was one of the Lincoln County Rifles. I had no idea that he had served as a deputy sheriff at San Patricio. I had no idea that Billy the Kid had been appointed as a deputy sheriff in Lincoln. I had no idea that he was appointed as a U.S. deputy marshal under Richard Windman. And legally appointed by the United States Marshal that was appointed by the Congress to New Mexico. So not everything has been written that you can read about or know about Billy the Kid. How many people know that he was a lawman? Most people think he was just a notorious outlaw, right? You do? So here in this book, I dug up some information from some early newspapers that were there had information on that I hadn't read previously. So when I wrote this book, I wanted things in here that nobody would know about. And I'm working on another book now that I'll have out Sunday. It will be Resurrecting Billy the Kid. And in Resurrecting Billy the Kid, I'll have other information of documentation of things that are very relevant to Billy the Kid in his life and career that many people don't know about. So that's my book. Are there any questions? Yes.
I hesitate to ask you this. What's your opinion of the recently found 10 type
Can you repeat that, please?
Could you
He
repeat
was asking the question about that well-publicized tintype Billy the Kid playing cocaine.
Playing
There is no documentation, no historical foundation of fact that would support him ever having played cocaine. Because for one thing, he was too busy. He didn't have time for, well, one thing we do know he did, and this is fact, he was a gambler. And he professed he was a gambler, and to a Las Vegas Gazette reporter, he said, "My career is that of gambling." Those weren't his exact words, but close to it. So, and he was arrested twice in Las Vegas for having a gaming table in Old Town. But that was normal back in those days. There were a lot of gamblers. That's how many people made their livelihood. And apparently he was very good at it. So perhaps he met up with Doc Holliday, that was a gambler. Or Wild Bill Hickok, that he was shot at a card game, right? That's the only way they could get him. Because, Wild Bill Hickok, no one really knows how many men he killed, but it could be like around 100. He was one of the fastest guns of the West, so his career was way up there as a lawman. And the interesting thing is that some of these lawmen were outlaws one day and they were lawmen the next. Like Wyatt Earp was being hunted by the law when he wound up in Tombstone and became the sheriff. Jose Chávez was a lawman, and then he got in trouble as an outlaw. And Doc Holliday was an outlaw, but then he's recognized in history as a lawman, right? So the only one that's still considered an outlaw is Billy the Kid, although he's also served as a lawman in some periods of time. Yes?
How many people was Billy the Kid killed?
They believe that the number was around 6. And that is documented. The story about 21 men during 21 years of his life was just something to spur on the legend and the career. Because ballads were written about Billy the Kid, songs were written about Billy the Kid, and movies, of course, were produced. But Roy Rogers was always a longman going after the people, outlaws, and who played the role of Billy the Kid. Any other question? Yes?
Just to make sure, was Billy the Kid shot at a ranch out there?
Pardon me?
When Billy the Kid was shot, was he at a ranch?
He was at Fort Sumner, at the ranch at Fort Sumner. Peter Maxwell's ranch. He belonged to his father, Lucian B. Maxwell. And Lucian B. Maxwell was a part of the Santa Fe Ring. And extremely wealthy. The wealth of, he bought the whole fort, and he turned it into a town. What I didn't know is that they had a restaurant there. They had a hotel there. They had a saloon there. It was a regular town. It wasn't just a few buildings that were there. It was, so when Billy the Kid was supposedly going out to cut a piece of meat from one of the rafters, which they wouldn't have put it out there in the first place, if you're a rancher, you would know you don't hang a carcass on a porch in front of your house.
Pretty young.
Which rancher does that? But he supposedly got an old butcher knife that was left over from the fort days, and he went over there to cut a piece of meat, from that rafter. And here I find out that there was a restaurant in Fort Sumner. It was just, and everybody knew him. He was well liked in Fort Sumner, so he could have just gone and ordered a meal. So that's why there are so many things that you read about that are contradictory. And one of the things that has never been researched is what did they actually have in Fort Sumner? I found out that they also had a church. They had funerals there. They had weddings there, and they had baptisms there. A close friend of mine, Bob Stahl, is an Arizona historian and is delving into a lot of this history. And he's coming up, he reads the newspapers constantly. And every time he finds something that supports his thesis, he writes it, takes it all of it, and documents it. He wrote a beautiful article for Chávez magazine, where because Billy the Kid, after he died, there were supposed to have been a couple of doctors from Las Vegas who went and dug up his remains from Fort Sumner and took him to Las Vegas. And they had his trigger finger was sent to the Las Vegas optic publisher, Russell Kistler. And they also had his skeleton. Oh, another thing that I found out that I didn't know anything about is that they had his skull on display. I never even knew that, but that came out in one of the Las Vegas optic papers.
Where
They're
did you
tracked
have it
down.
on display?
Because back in those days, if a famous outlaw was killed, it was a curiosity or a novelty, and people would pay money to go see it.
And so where was it on display supposedly?
The skull, I don't have no idea, but the trigger finger was at the Las Vegas optic offices.
Which was in what building?
Pardon?
In what building?
The building doesn't exist anymore. It burned down. A lot of the buildings that were built during the 1879, there was a massive fire that hit East Las Vegas, and a lot of buildings burned down. Was there another question?
Where was he born and
Supposedly in New York.
from his letters he appeared to be educated.
He was very well educated. In fact, over there in Silver City, he attended school, and he performed in plays. And he was supposed to have been extremely gifted, according to what his teachers wrote about him, people that knew him at that time. And he learned Spanish, but he wasn't just the only one. That's a mistake that people make, is that a lot of Americans, when they were coming into the territory of Mexico, the primary language of New Mexico was Spanish. From 1846 all the way through statehood. all government publications were produced in Spanish. The courts were in Spanish. So a lot of the Americans who were coming in were learning Spanish and adapting to Spanish culture and adapting to Spanish ways. So they were part of the local history and culture. If you hear about the branches over there in Mora, or you hear about the Cassidys and all of these, the Rudolphs. Milner Rudolph, that was a foreman of the Inquisition to the Death of Billy the Kid, he knew how to speak Spanish perfectly, and he knew how to write in Spanish perfectly. So he wasn't an oddity. It was just that it was a common language, and everybody learned Spanish. Yes?
I'm not a historian, but I'm a film enthusiast, and I believe that someone is doing a remake of Ben-Hur. I think that's going to happen. My question is, from a film perspective, since you say a lot of history is legend or folklore, and I agree with that, what did you think of Sam Peckinpah's movie where Billy the Kid is played by Chris Christopherson and Bob Dylan did the soundtrack?
The best and most accurate film that I ever got to see, and that really draws your attention, and it was brilliantly filmed, was the one, Gore Vidal's Billy the Kid, that starred, what's his name? The one that played, Val Kilmer. Val Kilmer did a brilliant job. If you were to watch that movie, you just won't believe it, because, and it sticks pretty much to the history that is known. And so that's the one. Morbid Doll.
Any interactions between Billy the Kid and the Native American population?
Yes, of course. He had many friends on both sides. Many people that supported him and that liked him and they were attracted to him. See, the thing about Billy the Kid, the reason that he has survived in legend is because he was supposedly very sociable, very likable, that you would notice him the minute he would walk into a building. And so people were drawn to him. And people write that he was a gentleman. Very courteous, very respectful, very honest, very sharing. You know, that, then you hear the other side, of course. But when you hear about what old-timers of the period, during the WA period in the 1930s, the Writers Project that they had, documented a lot of things that people said and remembered about him, and those are things that you always heard. The governor of the territory, Miguel Antonio Otero, said the same thing. He wrote The Real Life of Billy the Kid. He wrote his own book about Billy the Kid. And those are things that he stated. So you see, and I'm sure that you met somebody like that in the past. I had a friend that was like that. And I liked hanging around with him because he was the life of the party. He would drop people, and he was always joking around. That's what they say about Billy the Kid. And everybody liked him. He died at a young age, by the way, too. But I never forget him because of the way he was. And so when you think about Billy the Kid, those are the things that come to my mind. There weren't people that really had anything bad to say about him at the time that I know of. Really bad. Any other questions? Yes?
How was he able to escape from jail in Las Vegas and make it all the way back?
Oh, he didn't escape from Las Vegas, jail from Las
Where
Vegas.
was he in jail when he
He was in
escaped?
Lincoln.
In Lincoln, okay.
Yeah, he escaped from jail in Lincoln because, and this mystery, nobody knows. Pat Garrett wrote a book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, and he wrote about the incident and what took place. He wasn't there. He wasn't a witness. So a lot of the things that you read in these history books, they're not eyewitness accounts because they weren't there, so how would they have known? Huh? That's the right question. How is it that he would know? How do they know how Billy the Kid was shot? Who saw it?
Yeah.
He wrote his account. And Peter Maxwell was in hiding. He didn't want anybody no reporter to ask him any questions. He didn't want to be confronted by anyone. And Pat Garrett could you say it? He was attached to him for days because he didn't want him giving any side of the story. There was an interest. I communicated with different people, and I communicated with this descendants of Peter Maxwell from California. And one of the ladies, as the family historian, said that her great uncle Cyrus Maxwell was at Pete Maxwell's ranch the night that Billy the Kid was killed. And that, so Cyrus Maxwell was Peter Maxwell's brother, or related, cousin, I think. I think he was a cousin. But anyway, or first cousin. Anyway, that Cyrus Maxwell didn't agree with the story that was written down. And but he didn't want to talk about it, but that he never saw his relative for the rest of his life. I would want to know why. Other things that I've discovered is that John Chisholm, John Wayne played John Chisholm. that he had a diary, and he was held in jail at the San Miguel County Jail also at one period of time for something that he did. And but I don't have no idea what he did. But he wrote about it in his diary, and the diary is missing. Where is the diary? That would be my question. Can you imagine the information that you could get from these diaries? There was a Bonifacio Baca that was there in Las Vegas, at Lincoln at the time, that many of the incidents took place, including the ability of kids escape, and he kept a diary about everything, and that's missing. Nobody knows where it is. I almost tracked it down in Tula Rosa. But the family that's over there, that's our descendants of the Baca family, can't find it. They said they had some of those papers in the diary in a box, and they can't find the box because they moved from one house to another, and it's missing. But they told me that if they happen to discover it, they'll let me know. Yes?
What prompted Pat Garrett to hunt him down? What made him do that?
Well, it's because he was convicted of murder in Seattle, Mexico, and of murder of Sheriff Brady, and but the only thing is that the trial was supposed to be held in Lincoln, New Mexico, and one of the Santa Fe Ring district attorneys got the change of venue to the Seattle, where they knew the judge personally. And so there were witnesses that were over there, and he was the only one who was convicted out of several men that were involved. He was the only one that was convicted. And he, one of the deputies that brought him back to Mesilla was an outlaw that's well known in Western history, Bob Ollinger. He was a Western badman. But he was one of the deputies that brought him back to be hung, and that's where he escaped. So that's why I tell you there's a lot of interesting intrigue that took place, and a lot of mystery that's involved, because for one thing, a lot of things that have been written, people have just come up with a story, and then it's repeated and continues to be rewritten by other people, even though it might have been an thought. It could be, this is the way it happened, this is the way it could have happened, and then afterwards they convince themselves and they say, this is the way it happened.
Mr. Aragon, what do you think about the efforts by the state government to pardon Billy a few years ago during the Richardson administration?
I was completely for it. And I like the ideas, that, for example, that Bill Richardson, well, the thing is that several things are being considered. That's a major tourist attraction to Mexico. So we already have the Billy the Kid Casino. So if it's such a big deal, why don't they close down the Billy the Kid Casino? But they have the Billy the Kid Trail that's promoted in Ruidoso, Roswell, and Lincoln. What else? And so they have this Billy the Kid Trail that's part of the tourist industry in New Mexico. And New Mexico, the Department of Tourism had a Billy the, what is it called? The Hunt for Billy the Kid, something like that 30 years ago. And that was a huge media campaign that was developed by the tourism department to draw tourism to New Mexico. And so if you look at it through the light that Billy the Kid was featured in some format in many motion pictures through the 1930s, 1940s, even up to the 1970s, with Emilio Estevez playing the part, Roy Rogers and many others who were famous Western actors. If you look at the number of books, I marvel at the idea that there are 3 people in the history of the United States that have been the most written about, and that's Abraham Lincoln, John Kennedy, and Billy the Kid. Isn't that interesting? And still continues to be written about in magazine articles and newspaper articles and comic books. He's portrayed as a hero. Charlton Comics portrayed him as a hero in over 100 issues that were